Welcome to another episode of The Shift with Elena Agar. In this episode, I speak with Mizes. He is the CEO of a company called The Human Reach, where they work with individuals to help them land dream careers, anything from kind of job search strategy to actually landing that dream role that you're looking for. And he also does executive coaching for leaders around Silicon Valley and other parts of the US. In this episode, we really talk about some of the themes he's seen come out as people look for a job, maybe go through career change. And he really gives away some practical tips of where people can start if you're not sure where to get started, or how do you make traction and actually land that dream job. So he is a wealth of information when it comes to career development, coaching, and really just, growing in your particular area of work. So I highly recommend to check him out. He posts also a lot of and amazing content on his LinkedIn. So make sure you follow him there as well. But in the meantime, enjoy the episode and let me know what you think. AJ, welcome to the show.
Elena, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So career transitions can be daunting, and you and I both know it's probably one of the most daunting things people go through. What has inspired you to get into that field and be like, I want to help all these daunting people?
Totally. Well, I think it goes back to a story that I tell. I was one of my very first jobs, the CEO of the company, her name's Sarah Menke. Sarah, shout out if you're listening. And she sat me down during the interview and she asked me, what do you want to do? Like after you work at this recruiting firm, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know, but I know I want to own my own company and I want to help people. And this was, I don't know, maybe 15, 18 years ago. And she has been like a huge guiding force in my life. She was the one who kind of taught me about what it means to be an entrepreneur and how to grow a team and how to make a difference in the work that you do. And I really wanted to follow that. So, over the course of my career, I've worked in HR. I worked at Facebook for about 6 years, most recently. And I've led a lot of people teams, both in L&D, recruiting, HRBP, the whole kind of HR gamut. And people just always came to me asking for advice on like what to do with their career. And so I figured like, okay, this is something that people are seeing me as an expert in. And why don't I try, creating some content first, but then ultimately creating a program to help do this in real time. And so I've been doing that now for the past 4 years.
That's amazing. I was telling before we start recording, I was in a corporate retreat these last couple of days. And it's funny because one of the topics that came up, I think we were just sharing experience. I don't remember what was the context specifically, but it was around, how daunting a job search can be. And that so many people have been going like depression and just like feeling so low for that period of time and how normal it is. Have you also experienced that with people that you work with? Like what do you think it is about the job search process that seems to be universal no matter who you talk to? It's just miserable. Like what are we doing as professionals in this field,
Totally. I think there's a couple of things. I think one, it's repetitive, and I'll get into each of these. We can dive in and talk about these. But one, it's repetitive, like wash, rinse, repeat over and over and over again. And that is just super mundane. Number two, there's a lot of rejection. That's part of it. And that rejection can eat at our ego, can eat at our self-worth. And so I think that can be really difficult. And then number three is that the market shifts and changes all the time. And so what worked 6 months ago may not work right now. And so keeping up with that can be a challenge, and it leaves you feeling dumbfounded. It has left me feeling that way on what to do. So yeah, wash, rinse, repeat. You're right. It's changing your resume. It's applying. It's answering the same questions over and over again. And then number two on getting rejected, like that's the toughest part. And especially like at the time that we're recording this episode, like the market's just really hard right now. And unemployment sure is an interesting percentage. I think the last time I saw it was at like 2-3% on an average. But if you look at the open jobs that are getting posted right now, that is down almost 20%. So when you have a lot of people who are unemployed, or maybe even taking side gigs, which is contributing to the lower unemployment rate, sure, the unemployment rate looks good, but you're not making what you were making in your last role. So I think it's just really hard right now.
Yeah, I see that as well. And I think it's misleading in many ways as well. And I think I've also seen some reports recently, like the September surge, as we call it, right? Like when there's like a lot of change, it seems to be a little bit less this year. So it's not as the numbers are not as high as you mentioned. But what's also interesting, I think, is that a lot of people over the last couple of years just really wanting a change. So you have this interesting dilemma where it's not just people looking for like a job as you would, right? Like in previous years, it's like you're actually trying to like change a career, which is very different from just looking for like a career change is very different than from just changing a job within your industry, within your role. Have you seen that as well? Like because of all the changes people are looking for, that it might be
Yes.
even more harder to land a great opportunity.
Yes. And so yes, a lot of people wanting to like reevaluate their lives at this point and really decide like, is the thing that I've been doing for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years the thing that I want to be doing next? Just because a lot of burnout, there's a lot just in the system in general, I would say. And there's also the birth of a lot of new roles, right? With the advent of AI, with the advent of new software and different industries that are being created, right? It's presenting a lot of opportunities for people to relook at what they're doing, where they're doing it too, and wanting to make a pivot. And then that's compounded by, all of the lack of hiring that's happening right now. And so when you have a flooded market of candidates, it's about standing out and being I put this in air quotes, the special forces for that thing that you want to pivot to, and being able to tell that story accurately,
Yeah, and it's hard because it's like usually like how it works in HR, or for better or for worse, you gotta tick the box, you gotta come in, hit the ground running. And when you're doing a career change, especially if it's like mid-level or senior level of your career, people are gonna be like, wait a minute, you've been doing X, but now you want to do Y, what? And then it's like it's very, it becomes even harder.
Yeah.
I was reading something recently and I forget. I really need to look that up. I forget. I was talking to somebody about it today as well, and I was like, I forgot who said it. But there was I guess a CEO of a company, a large company, and he was addressing the whole 4-day work week, right? And he was saying, he was like, it's unrealistic because your competition is working 5 days. So, and then I was thinking, I was like, like from an employee perspective, right? Like from a candidate perspective, although we're all looking to have that balance and that well-being, and that because we're burnt out and we're trying to have more balanced life. But I'm curious your opinion. What do you think about that? Because he kind of made sense. He was like, well, your competition's working 5 days a week. So if you want to work 4 days, that's fine, but you're not going to make it. And I kind of tend to feel the same way on the employee side. That's my very personal opinion.
Yeah.
But it's I'm just curious what you think, what you've seen. Like, are we ever going to get to a point where we're not how to say that you don't have to hustle to get ahead, like work smarter, not harder, right? Or is it still like you just got to put on the grind? Like the grind is there no matter where you are or what you're doing.
Yeah. So I am not a fan of hustle culture. That is not something that I believe is going to contribute to the benefit of the world and benefit especially of workers
Mm,
in a capitalistic society like we are all born into.
yeah.
Uh, and a couple of things kind of come to mind when you mention that. So one is a study that was released by a sub office of Microsoft in Japan, where they basically were a beta test of a 4-day work week, and to determine whether or not they saw similar, less, more output from that team. And it was a huge success. They saw the same, sometimes if not better, employee engagement scores, sales scores, manager ratings on
Mm,
who they were, reporting to, and then also just quality of life for those folks, which is so important. So I think we're going to see a shift similar to like the remote work shift, but I think it's going to be a lot slower. Obviously, we were forced into remote work because of COVID. So it was kind of like, okay, here's some floaties, make it happen. Let's see if it's going to work. And the 4-day work week, I think, is going to be company by company. I
mm,
would say of like our clients that get roles at companies that have 4-day work weeks, they tend to be a lot happier. They're also remote too. But they work, I would say, sometimes longer days for those 4 days. So maybe instead of an 8-hour day, they're working a 9 or a 10-hour day.
mm,
But they enjoy having the 3 days on the back end
mm,
to rest and recharge. I think the other thing, I don't know if you're seeing this too, but like the other thing I'm seeing too is this big move in the gig economy. So
mm,
like we have several marketing clients that we're working with right now who actually are preferring to take on folks from like as a consultant versus going
mm,
in-house. And yes, sometimes it's because they were scarred because of the last place they were at. Maybe there was a terrible leadership team or the business tanked or whatever. So they're kind of wanting to try before they buy. But it's also very lucrative and they're not having to work as many hours as they did when they were like an FTE. So
mm. Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely see the gig economy is growing and growing, and it's for me personally, it's pleasant to see. But I also and I think there's different types of gig economy, right? I think there's this world of entrepreneurship that is very trendy right now,
Yeah.
and it's glamorous in some aspects, but it is grind work. I don't know any
Yep.
entrepreneur that does not grind.
Yeah.
It's just what it is, and I think that
Yeah.
people who leave the corporate world or and going into entrepreneurship are in for a rude awakening if they're not understanding the grind aspect. But I do think that the gig economy, like the part-time kind of consulting work, etc., I think I see a lot of that picking up alongside a full-time job. So you have like
Mhm.
some people have full-time job and then they do like gigs from time to time. So I do see that picking up, but it's an interesting trend. I'm curious where it's gonna go, because it is pretty disruptive. Because at least in the area that I'm in DC area, and so work with a lot of government entities and like agencies, and so they often prefer as well like full-time employees and like to be staffed on projects. So it's quite interesting. And I think I'm in a very unique compared to you. You're on the West Coast, so it's a little bit more. It's a different work culture almost on the West Coast, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And like, especially the startup world over here on the West is here in the Valley, like Silicon
Yeah.
Valley. Um, a lot of companies don't have the funding to hire like, a VP of marketing full time, pay $250,000 a year in salary plus benefits, blah, 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 blah. And
Mm.
so they tend, especially at the early stages, like seed stages, A stages, they start to hire people contractually, X amount of hours a week, a month, whatever, or for project basis. But you are so right about the rude awakening that comes with running your own practice. Regardless if you're like an entrepreneur wanting to build like a business with employees or wanting to work for yourself, like all of the admin that comes with it, like invoicing and calendaring and your standard operating, like all of that stuff that comes at the beginning stages, it is something to consider.
Yeah. I'm curious for, when you are talking with people who are still kind of in that corporate environment that really just kind of move from place to place, what have you found is like one thing that people typically overlook or don't spend as much time on, and what do they instead waste their time on, so to say?
You mean like in terms of wanting to make a move?
Yeah, like a career search strategy. Like when people look into career search strategies, what is the biggest thing you see like as a theme that maybe people miss, and
Hmm.
don't spend as much time on as they should?
Um, I think a lot of the times when we see people wanting to make shifts, they tend to focus on I can do X, Y, Z, and A, B, and C. And they tend to cast a really wide net on what they want to do. And typically that comes from a place of fear, of being really scared, like, okay, if I close myself off to one or two things, I'm going to lose out on all these other things. But
Mm,
there's a couple of things that tend to happen when you do that. One is that you actually focus on things that aren't actually strengths. You might be good at doing that thing, but you don't actually like doing that. And that's not a strength. That's actually a weakness, because if you're focusing on something that you don't love doing, you're forcing yourself to be in that vibe, in that rhythm, in that type of work. And then also from like an outsider perspective, when someone's looking at you, they're like, okay, AJ can do all of these things. Why wouldn't I just go? Why would I hire a Swiss Army knife when I can go hire the special forces who like literally just knows this thing like the back of their hand?
mm,
And so you tend to get looked over when that's the case. And so a lot of the advice that I give our clients is that you have to come across as a specialist. And so the work that you have to do to understand what it is that you are as a specialist is is the work that you have to be doing before you decide what you're going to pivot to. So what are
mm,
the things that you love doing? Why do you love doing them? Who do you love doing it with and for? What type of industries are the ones that like make your feet tingle when you wake up in the morning? Both from an experience perspective, but also maybe from an interest perspective you want to get into.
mm,
Um, Asking your former friends and colleagues like what you are known for. Like if someone were to call them up and say, "Hey, what's Elena known for?" What would they say?
mm.
And that starts to give you a lot of clues about what you're good at and what you love doing and how other people see you to help kind of narrow that down into a specialist zone.
Mm. And you know what's interesting is that, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, but when I speak with people around like career development, when someone is going through a career change and they start asking these questions, oftentimes it's the first time they're like, "What do I actually want to do?"
Yeah.
And I'm just almost like, "Psh," like, Like, how is it that we're not, and it's like, this is a system issue. Like we've gone
Oh
wrong
yeah.
somewhere in society, like where we're not asking certain basic questions that are so sounds so simple, like what do I want, but they're actually much more complicated, right? And I think that becomes like, because when you're speaking, it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense, you should do it, but how many people don't do it? I'm curious what you think about that.
Nobody. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. That's like unrealistic, but I would say like less than 10% of our clients actually have done the work up front to understand what they want to do. And maybe just career changers in general. Like even when I'm talking to people who aren't clients and just are thinking about making a career move, they just, they're stumped, but they haven't really gone through to make the effort to put together at a very basic level, like a list of things that they've loved doing in their last role. And so that you hit a nail on the head. It's kind of like putting the cart before the horse, like going after and finding something and just like changing your LinkedIn so that you can appear to do everything, versus like pause and take a moment to really think strategically about what you want to do.
Yeah. Well, it sounds scary, when you're like going through change and then you're like, wait a minute, like, and you start thinking about, because I've gone through this several times. I'm sure people are listening are like, this is what it is, but it's because there's so much fear, because you're like, wait a minute, what have I been doing for the last X number of years? Why haven't I, it's like almost like this regret, automatic regret. And you're like, what, have I lived wrong for the last 5 years? Like, well, so it's, and I think that's why it's so difficult. That's why we do the easy stuff. It's like, let me just, throw the, what's it called? Oh my goodness, when you're fishing.
The line out, cast the line.
Like cast the line out there and see who bites, So I think, because I think that's just, it's out of fear, because I think it just opens up, at least like just thinking of my own experience, it opens up like, a Pandora's box, like when you start going deep down that route, and then you're like, uh-oh, and it changes everything around you.
Yeah. Well, interesting thing about brain science there, because you're right. It's like so scary thinking about, yes, what am I going to be doing, like looking forward, but also like, what have I been doing for my entire career? Have I made all these mistakes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a really interesting that happens in your brain when that conversation's happening. And it's between your amygdala and your cortex. So the two parts of your brain that are responsible for decision making and then emotional response. And those two parts of our brains are always having conversations with each other. And the evolutionary reason why that happens is because those parts of our brain were developed to avoid things that were going to kill us, harm us. And so when we think about fear, anxiety, those feelings, right, both looking backwards and forwards, those are created that in the amygdala and the cortex decides what to do with that feeling, all in an effort to save our life. And so a lot of the conversations that I like to have with folks is, okay, let's just recognize that conversation's happening and that it's a biological response to what's happening. And it doesn't mean that it's bad or good. It just means that it's happening. And then to recognize, okay, is it true that, me changing a career from, let's say, a salesperson to a marketing person is going to kill me? No, right? 9.9999 times out of 10, it's not gonna kill you. But is it scary? For sure. And typically when we're scared about something, it's because we just don't have enough information. And so that's a way that I like to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful, because there's so much, especially just we're so, obviously we're very intelligent beings in general, right? But our biology is still very primitive in many ways, and it is there to just protect us. And I think just as you speak, and like just having that understanding, like, well, yeah, like I'm just human. I'm having this human experience, and it's okay. And like this is part of being human, and it's there to protect me. And I think just understanding that, and that it's okay to have all these doubts and emotions and feelings and fears and all those things, it's pretty normal, and that it's everybody goes through it at one point or another.
And Brene Brown says it really beautifully, like confidence doesn't come just by like waiting for confidence to land in your lap. Like it doesn't exist. The confidence comes by moving through the uncertainty, by moving through the thing that you're scared of, to give your brain more information so that it doesn't think that you're trying to die, right? And so more part of the biology piece is that when you notice the uncomfortability, when you notice that like this is something that you're really scared about moving through, just think about the first step forward. What would one step forward look like? Don't think about the end goal. That's 10 steps away. One step, and then do that one thing, and your brain gets more information. Okay, you've done that one thing. Okay, do the next thing. One more step forward. And that helps retrain your brain.
Yeah, I think that's super powerful. It's especially in this day and age, like we're, it's like the biggest thing I hear, at least in my work, is like, well, I don't have time. It's like, well, you don't have to have a lot of time, right? Like just, 5 minutes a day. Do you hear
Yes.
that quite a bit with some people you've worked with in the past?
Yeah. And typically, for at least like stuff I encounter, that tends to be like a front. There tends to be like something underneath the onion. Like if you peel back the onion layer of
Mm,
like, okay, you don't have time. What do you mean by that? And then usually it's like, well, I have all these meetings or I have these family obligations or whatever. Okay, what is it? What do you mean by you have family obligations and you have all these meetings on your calendar? And you kind of go down and start peeling back the onion layer. And I would say more than 50% of the time is that they're not making time
mm,
or that this isn't a priority right now, which is absolutely okay. That is cool because
mm,
when it becomes a priority, guess what we do? We make time for the thing that we have to do, right? Your kid has a soccer
mm-hmm,
game.
hmm.
You can't miss the soccer game. So you're going to make time to go to the soccer game,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's about making time. It's again, I was listening to I listen to too many things and I don't remember. I can't remember reference them. That's a problem. I need to work on that. But yeah, I was listening to it and they're saying, it's almost about like being proactive because we tend to be reactive as a society, I think in general, because we're just moving so fast.
Yeah.
And to your point, to like that hustle culture is very much ingrained in American society. I've
Yeah.
lived abroad and it's like, and I'm sure like, as people who are listening who've traveled, like pace of life is different in different parts of the world. Work means something different in different parts of the world. And I think here it's also like we're just always on a grind, it feels like, although there's a lot of talk about well-being and balance, but I feel like we're in terms of what's happening on the ground, it's still like, and it's and so it comes down to like being reactive versus proactive because we're not even making time to just pause,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. And like that pause button is so important. Like and it's hard, right? I'm not saying it's and I know you're not saying it's easy too, but
Mm,
it is so important. And I think going back to like our earlier conversation about like taking the pause, understand like what you love doing, why you love doing it, like that sometimes can be the pause
mm,
to just get out of the day-to-day grind, get out of those meetings where you have to do things, get out of the job search even, which is mundane and sometimes can get repetitive just to assess and see where you are.
mm.
Um, it's a powerful thing.
No, easier said than done, for
Oh
sure.
yeah.
Like it's so hard. It is. It's because we're creatures of habit, right? So like we're so set in the way we do things, and you have to like recreate basically how you think and approach life to know. But it's doable. People do it every day. So, tell me a little bit more about this concept you have of creating super fans of candidates.
Yeah. So I think another thing that we notice when we talk to clients is that they've done a lot of really cool stuff, like amazing accomplishments, but they don't know how to talk about it in a way that creates super fans or people who are just like salivating to be able to
Mm,
bring that person onto their team. The way to do that, and typically like the biggest area of improvement that we see, especially during the interview, is talking about the story on how you got a team, a person, a product, a service, whatever, from A to Z in a really succinct way. And the biggest area that we see for improvement are talking about results. So, for instance, I was talking with a client last week, and he had been mentioning how he runs multi-unit restaurant like groups in Texas, and he would like turn around whole districts like that were slumping in sales, and he would get them to like 20, 30, 40% higher revenue as a result of some of the trainings and things that he would implement. But that wasn't coming across in his stories. And so he would say something like, I put together this training and, we saw sales increase and, the franchisees were really, really excited and happy with the results. And while I'm sure they were, how did you quantify that? Like, what were the
mm,
sales numbers? And
mhm,
sometimes, the response back to that when we were coaching was, well, I don't have them. And so, but I would challenge that and saying, okay, do you know somebody who still works at that company? Yes, I do. Can you go ask them what the percentage increase was back in 21? So he did that. 35, 40% increase. And so that made that story incredibly powerful because the person on the other end of the phone is saying, okay, cool. They thought it was great, but what happened? What was the impact of the thing that you did that's actually going to
mm,
move the needle? And so we like teaching quant is what we say all the time when we're coaching in terms of anything that you can quant, numbers of people, how many, how much, what time frame, what percentage, like all of those things, even if it's comparing to half over half, quarter over quarter, year over year, to the industry standard, to a competitor. Like, you'd be so surprised about how much you can quantify if you really think about it, and force yourself to look for something.
Mm. And I think it also goes back to at least the culture. Like I'm from Russia, and I was born and raised there and grew up until I was 13. So I was very much embedded in Russian culture and in the way of thinking. And I see this around the world as well. It's almost like it's shame to talk about yourself. And I think and so it's like almost like you're bragging. So when people hear, they're like, oh, like I have to like sell myself, and it sounds dirty almost. Right. But it's like, no, you're just telling your story. So I like that you're just telling your story. Like you're not, it's not a dirty thing.
Exactly. And you're telling the truth. Like, and that's the other
Right?
thing too,
Facts,
right?
yeah.
Is that, yeah. And so like, I rational fear if you were like going in and selling yourself and you were lying, right? Because like, that's bad and we shouldn't be doing that. But you're, to your point, to what you just said, you're telling your story, and it's the truth of what you delivered to the business. So there's no, I totally understand different cultures and, um, feeling braggy. It's also the same in the UK, and folks have a hard time with that. But you're not bragging about talking about something you did. It's just you're just saying what you did.
Yeah.
No.
In your experience, you've worked also with a lot of people where you're, maybe they're looking to grow in their career or even get promoted. Are there any universal kind of things that people need in order to get ahead? And something that I've mentioned to before to my audience is I have this, theory that, or not theory, kind of what I see, I guess, is that most careers die at mid-level. And so to get to that next level, are there any like universal things, or to get promoted? Like who is it that gets promoted? Who is it that gets into those leadership roles? Like, have you seen anything that's really stands out for you?
So I would say universally, it's once you can elevate in your role, and I'll speak specifically about like leaders, because I definitely think you can grow as an independent contributor or as an IC on a separate track. But specifically for leaders, I'll say that you at a certain level, and that usually this happens at the director level, you have to be able to lead through others. And so you're not in the trenches anymore. You're not the one pulling the report. You're not the one directing the minutia of the work. You are the one directing the leaders who are directing the work of the work. And so you have to really understand how to motivate leaders, how to set vision. When you're setting vision with a bunch of ICs reporting to you, it's a lot easier and a lot more clear to talk about how you get from A to Z, right? Because you talk about the individual tasks, you talk about the schedule, you talk about, what needs to be reverse engineered. As a manager of managers or a leader of leaders, you have to set vision. How does the work get done? Why is it important? How do you prioritize? How do you coach leaders on how to deal with people issues and people problems, right? And so that is a really soft skill that you only learn by having a mentor, investing in coaching, really taking pause as we're talking about, and really thinking about how you're showing up, getting feedback about that. So I would say that's like a big number one. And then maybe number two is, I always have said this to like the bosses that I've reported to, but like my job to the person that I'm reporting to is to make their job easier and to make them look good. And so there's been a lot of times, where even when I was an HRBP at Facebook and things like that, I would work with leaders, and that was like such a mind-blowing concept to them that like their job was to make their leader look good. Because then guess what happens? That leader gets promoted. And guess what happens to you? You get promoted. Usually,
Hopefully.
right? Hopefully, yeah, exactly.
If that leader is not a, jerk.
Right, exactly. But not a jerk face. But that elevation, you're kind of like feeding it from the ground up. So I would say that's probably another pattern I notice.
Being in the Silicon Valley, and like you're very much in a techie space. I'm on the East Coast, also the industry I'm in, very techie. And what I've run into is that leadership growth in tech companies in particular seems to be scarce, is that the word? In terms of people actually wanting to go into leadership roles. So have you seen that? Like, is that just I don't know, an industry specific here, or have you seen it across board where, tech people just tend to be like, listen, I just want to grow as an individual contributor. I don't really want to manage people. I don't want to deal with clients.
Yeah. Yes, I have. And I think it's a beautiful thing because I would say a decade ago, that really wasn't prevalent. In order to move up in the world, right, get a promotion, you were forced to move from an IC to a manager and then move up into the ranks, especially like in the sales world, right? They would, a lot of companies would put their top salesperson as an IC, as the sales manager. And what the data show is that your top salesperson is not usually the best sales manager, because leadership skills are the most important thing that determines whether or not a leader is going to be successful. How are they motivating? How are they connecting? What is their EQ, their emotional intelligence? How are they making sure that they're managing performance for their low performers in a constructive way? And all of that you don't deal with as an IC.
Yeah.
And so I think this like binary way of looking at it in terms of, you can either grow as an IC and be really senior, maybe not have direct reports, but being seen as a team lead and being seen as a subject matter expert. Awesome. That's amazing, because then we have leaders who are in leadership roles who really excel and are great at and like being a leader. And I think that makes up for a really healthy ecosystem in a team.
Yeah, and I tend to agree on that side. And also there's the, depending, I guess, which companies, my fear for individuals that are like super like individual, like they're great individual contributors, but in many, many companies, you get to a ceiling real quick. Like it's very hard to, and it depends on the company, it depends on various factors. You can be you can be like a technical leader, you don't have to manage, but you can be like teaching other people how to be technical, right? But it seems like at some point it becomes limiting to their career, right? And I haven't seen it play out too much because I've worked with very like when Gen Zs, for example, so it's too soon, right? So like, but like I just worry like 5, 10, 15 years from now, what does their career look like? You know what I mean? Like in terms of potential growth in the future, unless they go into like their own business or freelancing, for example.
Yeah, completely. So internally within a company, I kind of look in growth in 3 different buckets beyond like IC to manager. So there's grow and roll. So as an IC, you're growing in level and responsibility. Growth as a manager, right? Direct manager, director, VP, etc. There is the move from an IC to a manager to IC. So that's bucket number 2. And then bucket number 3 is the job. So like moving from sales to marketing or from marketing to data analytics. Those are really the 3 growth areas when you think about it. And so if you can think about which one of those things are important to you, then it really gives you an idea about, does this opportunity exist at the company that I'm at? Whatever bucket I fall into that I want to grow next. And if it doesn't, then I need to go find it elsewhere. And or how can I create that opportunity inside my company if it isn't readily apparent to me that it exists right now? So how can I have a conversation with my manager that like my next chapter in my career is that I want to be in data analytics and I'm in marketing right now. So how can we make that happen?
Yeah, that makes sense. I have to pick on Gen Zs. Poor Gen Zs. Everybody picks on them. New York Times just always throws like ridiculous articles out. The other day I read something that was Gen Zs don't want to go into the office or something because they don't know how to deal with conflict. And it was like, and it's sad, but it's like, it's funny, but it's sad because it's kind of true, because they've, especially like those that are like, graduated during the pandemic, went into the workforce completely remote, they just haven't yet gotten the skills to like deal with office politics and office BS. So do you, what I want to ask you specifically is, a lot of companies are saying, listen, you're fresh graduate, you're junior, X, Y, and Z developer, whoever you are on a team, you have to be in the office. You got to learn the kind of day-to-day function of what an office is like, right? At least 2-3 times a week. And then there's other companies like, no, it's fine, you can be remote. What have you seen as helpful, not helpful? Like, where do you stand on that?
If the company has an office and you're close to it, you should go when you first start. Absolutely. Even if you've been at the company for a while, maybe you've been there through COVID when everybody's remote, now everybody's back, go to the office. Not for full time if that's not your jam, but go and like experience what it's like to work in an office, to have the water cooler conversations, to like, sometimes hear the BS gossip that goes on, and like how are you going to navigate that, right? Because it's happening, it just might not be happening in front of your face. And so you have to understand how to navigate it, like you're saying. And I would also say, to anyone who's like a leader out there that might be listening, bring your team together. Like the recommendation I give when I'm doing like team dev stuff is 4 times a year, so once a quarter, ideally is like the best time, at least for a week, so that you are starting to build those human bonds that we have to build. We're not meant to talk over a freaking, camera all the time. And
Yeah.
there is just something different. I mean, I remember the first time I went back to the office when I was at Meta, and everybody was gone for, whatever years for COVID. And I was so reluctant to go. And I was like, I love waking up and like putting on my sweats and like, walking 10 feet over to my office and having my morning. And I can't imagine going into the office, blah, blah, blah. But like, I was so filled up, like, of energy, of connection after just being there for one day. You just forget what it's like
Mm,
to be near other humans and to work with other humans. It's very different, like hanging out at a bar, a restaurant, whatever, and like doing work with people, collaborating, whiteboarding, brainstorming, like all of that really valuable stuff that happens in an office space. Um, you just miss when you're not there. So do I think like people need to be in an office 100% of the time? Absolutely not.
mm.
But I do think there's something to be said about spending time in close proximity with other human beings.
Yeah, for sure. I tend to agree. I think there is a lot of importance and just not importance, but there's just a lot of, especially for young talent. I see this quite a bit. Like it's so important because loneliness is on the rise, depression is on the rise, and it's really among the young populations. And I think that's a lot. That has a lot to do with it. I think your early 20s to mid, early your 20s in general is a very developmental area for us as like adults,
Yeah.
realistically. And I think especially in your career, it's kind of like a make it or break it years for somebody. And I think that again, I agree with you. Like I think companies need to find what works for them. I'm also not a fan of like 5 days a week, but once a week, twice a week, maybe once every couple of weeks, whatever floats the boat, right?
Yeah.
So it's many ways to do it, but yeah, I tend to agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I think, I was just, as you were talking about that, I was thinking back to like, I was trying to think like, okay, the people that like have helped me in my career, were advocates for me, were they people that I met when we were during COVID, or were they people prior to COVID who I literally saw every single day, was talking with all the time? I'd say eight or nine of the 10 that I can think of right now were ones that I had developed like in-person relationships with, that I
Hmm.
had gone to dinner with, that I had been in the trenches with, like in a whiteboarding room, whiteboarding something. It's just because I think of the trust that I built, maybe, or that we built, the two of us,
Yeah.
going through it. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's probably. I think we all know this, but I think it's a good reminder because as you're speaking, I was like, I felt the same way. I was so comfortable at home. So I'm very social as a person. I mean, I'm introverted, but I can be extroverted, and I'm good in crowds. But I after just not being around people as much, like I used to be like the networker and I used to be out all the time. And then
Yeah.
I stopped doing that and I got so comfortable to where when I did go to a networking, it would drain me. And it took me
Mhm.
like months to work my way up to just being around humans on that level again. And
Mhm.
to your point, like you just get very, very comfortable. But I also saw an improve of my quality of life when I started going out and meeting more people and spending time. And I think it's really good for us as just our well-being, overall well-being.
Yeah.
Um, talk to me a little bit more about. We started this conversation talking about how daunting this process is and how of a killer it is. Whether it's career growth or just life is hard in general, and career growth is hard, and career search is hard, and if it feels like so much of it just stumps in our confidence. What are some of the things maybe you've seen people effectively do to keep their confidence up and not have it crush their soul, and not how do you not take rejection personally?
Yeah. So I'm gonna teach you a little trick that I learned from the American Psychological Society that has always, and to this day, I still have this exercise on my monitor. But essentially what happens, what I do is I think about 3 words on how I want to show up to the world, or how I want to be perceived, or how I want to feel. So that might be like confident, unbreakable, and effervescent, let's just say. And once I have those 3 words, you think of an icon or an emoji that encompasses all 3 of those words. And so that might be like, I don't know, the emoji with like the sunglasses and a smiley face, right? And so what you do is you draw that smiley face. Doesn't matter if you're a good artist or bad artist, with the sunglasses on a Post-it note or a piece of paper or whatever. And you stick it on your monitor, you stick it on your mirror, you stick it on somewhere where you're going to see it every single day. And it sounds so silly, but the study showed that by placing an intention with a piece of iconography, you're actually 10 times more likely to show up in that way because you were the one that created that synapse in your head, right? Of the smiley faces to those 3 words. The key is that you're putting it in a place that you're going to see it all the time, not in like a journal page that you're going to flip over and never see it again, because it's a constant reminder about a choice that you have on how you show up, a choice that you have about the feelings that you are experiencing. And Tony Robbins says all the time, emotion creates emotion. So if I'm always focusing on like the scariness of changing careers, I'm going to feel that emotion. I'm going to feel scared. But if I'm focusing on, I'm really excited about creating a new connection with somebody who's going to give me more information, that's exciting, right? Instead of like the scary part of like, what if I don't like the job? What if I can't land the job, et cetera? And so I like that tactic.
I love that. Never thought about that. It's just like, as you're speaking, I was like, yeah, if you have it, because then you're there, and it's almost like, it's like a affirmation, and it almost, because it's that the visual piece, I think. And like you said, you've created it. No matter how good or bad that the drawing is, but your brain understands what it represents. And when you see it, it's like a confirmation, and not a confirmation, maybe like an affirmation daily thing. And like you look at it and you remember. And I think that's so powerful. It's like, I mean, it starts with our thoughts, right? Like we know this with all the neuroscience research and behavior science research that comes out, like how much our thoughts create the world around us, right? To an extent, obviously, you can't just manifest a great career. You actually got to work for it, so, but I think that there is some power to how we talk to ourselves, right? And the thoughts. And I love that. I never heard of that sticking. I'm going to do it. I think everybody who's listening should just do it.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm horrible at drawing, but I'm going to do my best.
I am too. So I won't show you my sticky note.
Yeah. All right. I was going to ask, but I was like, I won't. I didn't want to put you on the spot. So before I ask you my last question, tell us, where do you hang out? So I know you post a ton on LinkedIn. We recently connected, and I love your content. It's very entertaining. It's very light, but at the same time, so inspiring and knowledgeable. So aside from LinkedIn, where I recommend for everybody to follow you, where else do you spend most of your time?
Like in the digital world?
Yeah, in the digital
world.
Yeah. We don't want anybody stalking you now, AJ.
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram, probably like the second most active, and it's just at AJ Mizes.
All right, awesome.
Yeah.
And the last question I ask all of my guests is, what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Ooh. I think it's what's the life I want to design? And I use the word design very specifically because we all have the agency to create the life that we want to design. And I'm not saying that life doesn't get hard. I'm not saying that bumps in the road don't come. However, when you, at a meta point of view, 30,000 feet in the air, when you take out the little bumps, or even big bumps, the life that we design is a really powerful thing. And when you think about how you want to spend your time, who you want to spend it with, what types of things you want to be doing, you can reverse engineer what needs to happen in order for you to live that life. And so I think that's a question to ask.
I love that. What is the life you want to do? What is the life you want to design?
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. AJ, thank you. I feel like I could spend hours talking to you, so I'm going to hold my questions for next time, but I'm sure we will speak again and record something together again. But thank you for your time today.
Such a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.